Hello and welcome to this special 2-hour episode of the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. Now, you might have noticed, but it's been a pretty busy 24 hours in the world of college basketball. Last night, the NCAA tournament brackets came out. March Madness is here, and we are marching towards that one shining moment. And then today, the transfer portal opened up, and we are going to be breaking down both of those huge topics in great detail here today over the next hour. Before we get started, make sure you smash that like button, you subscribe to the 247 Sports channel, and we're going to get right into it. I'm going to welcome in CBS Sports college basketball analyst Chris Walker and 247 Sports college basketball writer Isaac Trotter to help us break down the bracket. Now, fellas, first of all, thank you for joining us. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to go through each bracket. We're going to talk about each of our favorites and then each of our sleeper picks so we can help the people at home pick up their bracket, especially if it's one of those that weights the upsets a little heavier. So we're going to start with the favorites. Isaac, low-hanging fruit here in the East region, but I will start with you. Who's your favorite?
Well, it's UConn, right? They've separated, I think, from the rest of the teams in the country. They have a lot of just strengths. They just don't have many weaknesses. A lot of teams are focused on running a lot of ball screen offense, and UConn does a ton of sets. They're very intricate. They're very hard to prepare for. Donovan Clingan, when he's healthy and he's on the floor, their defense is 10 points per 100 possessions better. They're just elite on both ends. But I will say, like, the East region is absolutely the region of doom because Auburn is fantastic. That's a top 4 team on KenPom. Illinois is surging right now, number 1 offense in the country since January 1st. Iowa State, number 1 defense in the country now. They've passed Houston. This bracket in this quadrant, this region is absolutely loaded. And I didn't even mention FAU and San Diego State, who made the Final Four last year.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we'll probably have some running commentary on the selection committee as we go here, but this bracket is absolutely a joke. UConn is the top overall seed, and they were rewarded by being in a bracket with 2 of the other top 5 teams in the country, according to KenPom. So 3 of the top 5, including the conference champions from the Big East, SEC, Big 12, and Big 10. So this is absolutely a loaded bracket, and I would argue, even though they're the top overall seed, they have the toughest draw of any of the 4 number 1 seeds. All right, Chris, we are going to go to you. And is there a favorite beyond the Huskies?
For me, there definitely is a favorite. And to the points that you and Isaac just mentioned, there is one thought in my mind. The committee does not want a repeat champion. Okay. They put it in the toughest bracket. I have Auburn. I believe that Auburn has the firepower, shall I say, to upset UConn and be the pick to go to the Final Four from the East region. Janai Broome is fantastic. I think Bruce Pearl, who's been there before, Jalen Williams, who's healthy again. These guys, I'm telling you right now, the funny thing is they only had one quad 1 win going into the SEC tournament, but every win that they had was plus 10. So the metrics can say whatever they want when it comes to the NCAA tournament. You look at a team like taking down UConn, it is very difficult. You guys mentioned about ball screen defense. You need athletes, right? And you need shot makers because UConn can be beaten because in the Big East, which was sham with those 3 bids, they got behind a number of games and they had more talent than everyone. So they were deeper and they were able to overcome it. But now they're going to be playing a champion in the SEC who comes from a power league. And again, you only have to be good on one night. And I believe if Auburn plays UConn in that situation, I believe that they can get it done.
They've got enough size too, right? And here's the point about the committee. Auburn, according to KenPom.com, which is clearly something that the committee did not take into consideration for reasons
at all,
boggle my mind. I have no rationale for why that was the case. Auburn is the 4th highest rated team in the country, and they got the 4th seed in this region. So it's just, it's beyond me. So I have no rationale. I can't explain.
Well, I'll tell you this the quad 1s, they only had one quad 1 win going to the SEC. I mean, the numbers were great, but again, for some reason, they could not get it done in the quad 1 sector. And I think that's what hurt them, to be honest.
And they've got to get through Auburn just to get out of their side of the bracket. We talk about the bottom side of the bracket. You've got Illinois. Isaac talked about what a good offensive team they are. How about Iowa State, who just has the number 1 defense in the country? This is a team that really forces turnovers. They blew Houston out in the Big 12 championship. And that was right after they handled Baylor. I mean, this is a team that has 4 players that average in double figures. They turn you over. They create a lot of pressure. Iowa State, certainly a threat, as is Illinois that Isaac mentioned earlier. So those are certainly some of the favorites here in an absolutely loaded East bracket. What I want to ask you guys about now, though, is who are the Cinderellas? Because in the first week of the season, this is the first week of the March Madness, I should say. These are the teams that really, make the drama, make the cinema. Who do you guys like as your favorites to spoil an upset or score an upset? Isaac, I will start with you.
I really like what Drake has put together this year. I think Darian DeVries is one of the rising stars in the coaching carousel. And this team is really good. And I think the location of where it is really important too. Their quadrant is going to start in Omaha. That's just a 2-hour drive from their campus in Des Moines. That's going to have a lot of people there. And this is a really good matchup, I think, for Drake in the first round, especially against Washington State. All season long, Washington State has basically lived at the rim. That's their MO. Well, Drake is one of the best rim protecting teams in the country. They're 7th in allowing the fewest number of shots at the rim. Then you add in a star like Tucker DeVries, who can be the best player on the floor at any given moment. Like, he's a legit All-American candidate. Like, Drake is built to win that first round game. And I think they're built to give Iowa State some trouble too. Like, that's going to be a grinder game, low possessions, just shot making is going to be at a premium. You're going to have to make tough shots to beat Iowa State. Tucker DeVries can do that. So I'm buying Drake, especially, with the home crowd advantage that they're going to have. Iowa State's going to have a great crowd there too, but Drake is going to be well supported in Omaha.
How about this? Iowa State would have loved to have had Tucker DeVries, but he was going to play for his dad. And to your point about Drake being a likely Cinderella, the metrics and the analytic models and even Vegas, they are favoring Drake in that opening round game. This is a 9 seed who is favored to win that opening round game. So I think you have certainly a good point there. Chris, who you got for an upset threat?
You know what? In the East, I got an upset threat of Duquesne over BYU. I just covered Duquesne in the A10 tournament. They have a ton of size. They have 2 elite players in Jimmy Clark and Day Grant, and that's what it takes to win in the NCAA tournament, shall I say? Again, when people quote metrics, and I keep telling them, I said, listen, all that is fine, but once you play in the tournament, right, the game is going to be played at a certain pace, and you're going to have guys that can make big shots, and you're going to have a team who's elite defensively, like Duquesne, that has the size in the interior and has an elite defender, all A10 defender in Jimmy Clark, a big point guard. They have size. They have DeMichael, who can make shots as well, and they have Kareem Rozier, another player who can make shots, comes off the bench as a ball hawk. So again, keep Dan Brown, and this is their first tournament since 1977. And they started the A10 0-5, shall I say. And if they didn't start 0-5 and he made some changes to his roster, to his lineup, they could have easily challenged Richmond and Loyola Chicago for the championship in that league. I think it's an underrated league. I think that league, the minute I saw them practice, that was the first game I covered them live, I say that team right there could beat a lot of teams, and a lot of people don't know about them. A lot of transfers, a lot of experience. I know you guys are going to talk about the transfer portal later. They've done a great job of mixing international experience with really good players. They're talented. They're athletic. Look for that team. We're trying to find that Florida Atlantic of last year. Duquesne, to me, is that team because of all the things I mentioned before that has an opportunity to do that.
I think that first round matchup between Duquesne and BYU is maybe the most fascinating one in this region, because BYU is a team that takes over half of their shots from behind the 3-point line. I mean, they live or die by the 3. So that makes them susceptible to an upset bid, especially if you're playing a team, to your point, that plays really slow, grinds out in the defensive end. But if somehow BU gets through that game, they, to me, become a Cinderella in and of themselves because of their style of play. When you have that high risk, high reward style and you take that many threes and you play at a faster tempo, so you're going to have that many more possessions, it gives you a chance to play spoiler. So I think that first round game, BYU and Duquesne, really interesting. If BYU and Illinois match up in the second round, that's one that I'm going to have circled. Illinois is already playing a 3-point heavy team in Morehead State. The BYU would give them another threat, very similar. They've got Jackson Robinson, a really intriguing big man. and then Ali Khalifa as well. So a couple of the matchups certainly to watch in this East region. As we take a look now, we're going to wrap up with some of the best NBA prospects in this region. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. It's obviously going to start at UConn, guys. You got Steph Castle, Donovan Clingan. Those are two guys who are, in their mind, playing for a spot in the lottery. I'm not a big proponent of NBA teams making decisions based on what happens in March, but they've certainly got a chance. Illinois, Terrence Shannon, he is playing at a just tremendous rate right now. Dropped 40 the other night in the Big Ten tournament. After he returned to the lineup, he's older, but he's someone that I think NBA scouts are going to be out to watch as well. Coleman Hawkins, another one. I think that's a subplot for this Illinois team. Can he get going when Shannon is on the floor? A few of the different things to watch here. All right, we're going to move on now to the South region. We're going to do it the exact same way. We're going to go favorites first, and then we're going to go into sleepers as you get a look at the bracket. All right, Chris, I'm going to start with you this time. Who do you like as your favorite in the South region?
Listen, Fink, I hope that the University of Houston Cougar fans don't watch this podcast. I want to make sure everyone subscribes like they should, but they're going to kill me for this one because I believe that the Kentucky Wildcats will come out of this. I'm a Houston native. This is why I preface it by saying that. But at the end of the day, the Kentucky Wildcats, in my opinion, right, they have the firepower. When I talk about as a player and as a coach in the NCAA tournament, metrics aside, you have elite players, right? You have depth. You have a coach who has been there before. Surely, Houston's a very great team, a very good team. They put the vice grips. They put the clamps on you. Top defensive team in the Big 12, one of the top 5 in the country. But they don't have the depth. They have injuries. They lost Arsenal. They lost Tugler. Surely, they have Coach Sampson, who's done it at a high level, who's been there before. But when you bring Reed Shepherd, and you have, to me, who's one of the best players in the country, and then you have size inside, right? You have Trey Mitchell, who's an anchor, an older player, Antonio Reeves, who's a shot maker, Dillingham, who's a wild card off the bench. The question is, and what reason why I'm picking the Kentucky, and their season started to turn at the end of the year when it looked like defensively that they were going to struggle, maybe mid-SEC, is because freshmen got older. Edwards started making threes. And again, when you talk about the one and done guys of Kentucky, Calipari realized that Wagner's a really good player, but Shepherd, he's the one. And you have to put him in the lineup, even though you don't start him. And what they do is that locker room is very important. And they have a great mixture of talent there, where I believe that this is the breakthrough that Big Blue Nation needs. It is a shame that it's taken Kentucky this long. And they are in the region with Houston. But I believe that Houston, right, as great as they are, will struggle because they don't have the depth to counteract the talent of Kentucky in this win or lose or win or go home tournament.
All right, now we're going to talk about Houston in a minute, but I want to ask you about this. John Calipari, they're doing it a little bit differently, right? They're playing with pace. They're playing with three-point shooting. They're the best three-point shooting team in the country. Calipari was quoted, I believe it was yesterday, saying he may have a defensive wrinkle. He may play two of the bigs. And I'm sitting there saying, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. Play more shooting. So, I mean, this is a team, again, they're the best three-point shooting team in the country. But when you look at the amount of shots they take from behind the arc, it's about middle of the pack. Double down on that. Forget about the counting metrics. Forget about people saying, oh, those teams scored that many points about you. That's because there's that many possessions. Defensively, they're not great, but they're not awful. So I want to ask you about that. The two big possibility.
Yeah, let me speak to that. So then I don't know. Isaac, real quick. I think he's looking ahead to that battle possibly versus Houston. Because in order to beat Houston, you have to bring your hard hat and your lunch pail. You cannot. You will not. They put two people on the ball at every time. There will be a contested shot on each possession. There will be very few, unless they get them in transition. That's how you have to beat Houston. Once you get to a half-court setting, you can forget about getting open shots or getting into the lane. There will be no driving kick situations. You won't be able to activate the bigs from the dunker spot. You will have to be able to get on the offensive glass. But more importantly, Houston, similar to the old UConn teams that Jim Calhoun had, the second shot is their best shot. You have to come ready for a fight. And they're gonna have to have some size, and those smaller guards won't be able to do it against that physical team of the University of Houston.
All right, interesting enough. I've got my own take on Houston that's coming up soon, but Isaac, who do you like in this bracket?
Yeah, for me, I think injuries really do mar this region, right? Marquette's really banged up. Florida just lost a starter. We've seen Houston's, obviously their injuries are through the roof, and it's a real problem. Texas Tech is also super injured too. So I look at Duke, and the thing I keep going back to with Duke all year long is if you have an intimidating, low post, dominant center, that gives them problems. Look through this quadrant. Like, where do you see one? I don't see one at all. Houston doesn't really have that guy. Texas A&M doesn't have that guy. Wisconsin, Stephen Crowell and Tyler Wall aren't really those type of guys. Kentucky plays through its guards, not through its bigs. You know, Marquette, Oso Ighodaro is an awesome player, but he's not that low post traditional big plotting center that's going to really give Duke's front court some issues. So I think this is a really interesting draw for Duke, and matchups is everything. This is a really good matchup for Duke to go on a run. I'm still bullish on these guards. I'm still bullish on what this offense looks like with Kyle Filipowski at the 5. And I think the Sean Stewart emergence late in the year is real and a big game changer for them because he is awesome on the offensive glass, a really good processor. I've liked some of the passing that he's been able to do as well out of the short roll. He does a lot of things well for them, and he's a great mix-up option just to throw in there if Mark Mitchell doesn't have it on any given night. So give me Duke out of this region.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I think they're the most talented team. It's why they started the season ranked where they were. But this is also a team that's lost 2 in a row and 2 games that, quite frankly, we expected them to win. They had North Carolina on their home court for a share of the ACC, and they lost. Then they had NC State in the ACC tournament, and they lost. So this is a team that is very much trying to find itself right now and manage all of these preseason expectations, given who they had come back. I will continue to say I think a subplot of this Duke season is getting these guards to click at the same time. Jared McCain, Tyrese Proctor, Jeremy Roach. When everybody is in the lineup, all 3 guys have not played their best basketball on the same night. They're going to have to do that here if they want to make a run to Phoenix. All right, we've talked a lot about Houston in this one. Obviously, they were one of 3 teams that were considered to be among the elite in college basketball throughout the course of the year. They have the best defense in the entire country. They are battling some injuries, but I love this backcourt. I think Jamal Shead is an absolute warrior. He sets the tone on both ends of the floor. And Houston is a team, like, they may not be the trendy pick anymore, given how they lost to Iowa State in that Big 12 tournament, but this is a team that has been among the top 3 in the country all season long. Interesting, though, they play very, very slow. And so when you talk about winning 4 games in a row, 5 games in a row, 6 games in a row, and you have that limited number of possessions, how susceptible does that make you to playing against a team that's just hot from the outside? But I go back to it again. I think they have one of the best backcourts in the country. They're obviously a threat. They're obviously somebody we have to talk about, but I digress. All right, fellas, let's talk about the sleepers. Chris, who's going to play spoiler in this region?
Isaac, put your Dukes up, man. I'm going with James Madison. There's no question, in my opinion. They're the champions of the CAA. And I'll tell you this, I've had the chance to cover them this year in Cancun, and I watched them up close and personal. Mark Byington is an excellent X&O coach, a disciple of Pete Gillen, our partner here at CBS. And I'm telling you, Terrence Edwards Jr. is good as advertised. He's one of the best guards in the country. Could have put his name in the portal. He chose to stay at James Madison. TJ Bickerstaff is a kid who came from BC, had a decent career there, but he has shined at James Madison. And I'm just telling you, James Madison is one of those teams. They won at the Breslin Center at Michigan State to start the year and had people start thinking, oh, wow, is James Madison the new College of Charleston, where they have a chance, shall I say, maybe to go undefeated, but they did not even win their own league. App State won their league, which shows you how good of a league that league probably could have been. But 30 games is hard to win. I don't care what league you're in. And I'm saying, you mentioned a minute ago about Houston and their playing style. And guys, you got to have, when you play in the NCAA tournament, and I keep telling people this, you got to have people that can make plays. You're going to be scouted. They're going to look at synergy. They're going to look at whatever you think. They're going to know every single play. These coaches are good. This is a championship tournament, right? And you got to have guys that can make plays beyond that. You mentioned Duke before. One of the things that Duke struggles with is toughness. They're going to play against a Houston team. Talent, to a degree, matters. Toughness matters more when you play against a team like Houston. But James Madison, what they can do is they can get ahead of you. And when they get ahead of you, right, and they start feeling it, they have a coach that knows how to manage the game. And I'm telling you right now, James Madison will have the swag, right, the joie de vivre to play in this tournament and not feel like an underdog. It would not surprise me one iota. Now, they're in a tough region, right? Very tough region, a whole lot of talent, probably unlikely. But again, if you have to pick somebody, I'm picking the Dukes.
31 wins on the season. It's hard to argue with that. Isaac, who you got playing spoiler?
Man, I love that call, Chris. I think they're absolutely beating Wisconsin. Absolutely. Put it in ink. That's what I have of James Madison definitely beating Wisconsin. For me, though, I think the real team here is Florida. That's a terrifying 7 seed. We have seen them play at an elite level. They went into the portal. Todd Golden went into the portal and really crushed it. Tyrese Samuel has been an outstanding addition for them in that front court. They went into the back court. They got Walter Clayton Jr., who was schooled at Iona under Rick Pitino. Will Richard, a year 2 transfer out of Belmont's been awesome. Zion Pullen has been phenomenal this year, and they can just beat you in so many ways. This offense is a supernova in transition. They can slow it down. You want to slow it down on them, they're fine with that. Like, they're going to kill you on the glass too. And I do think that, like, in the NCAA tournament, rebounding matters. And this is a group that can really get after you on both ends of the glass. You will feel Florida. And they also have guards that can go and really go off. And we still haven't really seen the Riley Kugel show lately, honestly. So it's a very fascinating team with a lot of depth and a lot of size and a lot of great guards. Now, the problem is that Micah Handlockton injury on Sunday against Auburn, devastating, right? Just a devastating injury. Their offense was 10 points per 100 possessions better with Handlockton on the floor, and he's a great rim protector. So it's a big loss, but I think they have the depth, especially with Alex Condon, to make up for it.
Now, Isaac, here's my thing with Florida. When I watch these guys, I see a team that is scoutable, meaning like their personnel is fairly one-dimensional. They got shooters, they have drivers, they have bigs who don't step out. So this is a scouting report type of team where you can say per man, okay, we're running him off the line. Okay, we're closing out short on him. Okay, we're daring him to step out. That's my only concern with this Florida team because you mentioned it. Riley Kugel hasn't made shots this year, 31%. Even Will Richard hasn't really made shots this year, 34% from 3. So you know Walter Clayton's going to drill shots. You know Zion Pullen's going to try and get to the rim. If you dare him to shoot, he's going to shoot it, and he's going to make it, but he's only going to take a couple per game. So that's my only concern with this Florida team. And they are potentially have a matchup with Colorado if Colorado can get out of Dayton. Colorado is my pick for a sleeper. Why? Because I think their big 3 is as good as anybody in this region. I mean, you are talking about a guy who's got a chance to be a lottery pick in Williams, Tristan Da Silva, who's ultra efficient, versatile, productive forward, and then KJ Simpson, who's just putting up ridiculous numbers throughout the course of the season. His shooting splits are absolutely off the charts, but he's also creating for others, and he's also rebounding the ball. Now, the key for Colorado is taking care of the basketball. If they can take care of the basketball, I really think they have a chance to go and make a run here, especially against a Florida team that is now missing a key piece inside. Colorado, we know, has the guys to do it. When it comes to sheer talent, they can go with anybody. That's why I like them for a chance to be a spoiler. All right, guys. We're going to wrap this region up with a look at the best NBA prospects. I just talked about one of them, and that is Cody Williams, and we talked about that threesome out there in Colorado. Kentucky, obviously, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, Justin Edwards is getting some first-round traction again. I want to say something about Marquette, though, because you've got Tyler Kolek, and if he's healthy, I think they're a legitimate threat to come out of this region. Oso Ighodaro, we talked about him in his floater game. Cam Jones, this guy is a straight bucket and could be playing his way into first-round territory. But as I said, if Tyler Kolek gets back on the floor, the team we have not yet talked about, Marquette, I think has a very good chance to come out of this region. It's going to be one of the interesting storylines, as Isaac noted. We've got injuries and NBA prospects in this region. All right, let's keep it moving now. We're going to go to the Midwest region. Take a look at this bracket here. And obviously, this is Purdue, another team that has all kinds of expectations. As John Rothstein likes to say, their season begins in March, but they are battling an injury of their own. And so it's going to be an interesting storyline here to watch. Fellas, you know the drill. Favorites first, then Cinderellas. Isaac, we will start with you. Who is your favorite in the Midwest region?
I'm annoyed about the Midwest region because I love Purdue, I love Tennessee, and I love Creighton. So I have to pick between one of my three of my favorite teams in the tournament. I'm going with Creighton, though. This is a group that has been there and done that in the big dance. You know, Trey Alexander, maybe the best mid-range game in all of college basketball. Baylor Fireman, one of the most improved players in college basketball, and he was awesome last year. And then the king of verticality in the middle, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. Every single time, it's like teaching tape. He jumps straight up in the air and is an awesome rim protector without fouling. So it's just a really, really great asset to have a player like that on the floor. 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year, and then all these guards. I haven't even mentioned Stephen Ashworth, who has really come on strong toward the middle of Big East play. This group relies heavily on jumpers, so that's a little scary, right? Just because they don't get a ton of shots at the rim. But it's okay to shoot a lot of jumpers when you're one of the best shooting teams in the country. So there's some questions about Creighton's depth. There's some questions about this draw. This region has some absolute units in it, right? But I'm going to buy the team that's been there and done that. So give me Creighton.
Wow.
One of the things Chris doesn't like it. I'll give Chris a chance. Chris a chance to rebuttal. This is what I'll say about Creighton. Game planning for Greg McDermott is a whole lot different in the Big East when you've been guarding his sets 2 or 3 times a year, 4 years. And you're I don't want to say you're used to him because he's got such an intricate offensive system. You never get used to it. But trying to prep for him on 48 hours notice, good luck. I mean, I know that you'll have another guy on the staff digging into him ahead of time, but getting your players to lock in on Creighton with a short turnaround is a daunting challenge. So that's one of the reasons why I think they got a chance. But Chris, you said, wow, who do you like? Who you got?
I mean, Isaac, Isaac is a very smart, astute guy, but I think Isaac picked with his heart and not with his head there because he knows that Creighton, I don't like to use the word soft. I love Greg McDermott, Ryan Miller, who's on the staff. I've worked with before, and I know his family very well. At the end of the day, for me, just to talk about Creighton, depth, I think, is a tough one. They're a team that does not foul, which keeps them in games, but their offense sometimes, if you can really take away that three-point shot, Shireman sometimes disappears. Ashworth, again, not a guy who could put the ball on the floor and can be taken advantage of defensively. Sometimes they struggle at the absolute wrong times. And in the NCAA tournament, and then they did well last year. I thought they blew an opportunity to get to the Final Four. But in the NCAA tournament, when you have those lulls like that, you have to be able to dig in defensively. And having Kalkbrenner as a rim protector helps. But again, other than Trey Alexander, their athleticism on the perimeter, guarding guards, talented guards, I think will be tough, which is why I don't think that they will be able to get past Tennessee because, again, I love Tennessee's toughness. I think they have the size inside to counteract Kalkbrenner. The other thing is Tennessee with Dalton Connect. Again, he's the story of college basketball. I mentioned earlier, you guys are going to talk about the transfer portal. I'm telling you right now, there is no way that Rick Barnes, when they brought Dalton Connect in from Northern Colorado, could have expected what has happened with this young man. He is clearly one of the best players in the college basketball. He was the SEC player, in my opinion. He was the best player, period. It wasn't even close in that league. And it should be a first-round draft pick. I don't know if the NBA, they don't like picking older guys, but it will be a travesty if he's not, because he is an excellent player. Now, speaking of Purdue, and I love to tease Purdue and call them Purdue because, again, the last few years, it has been horrible what has happened to them because they've had great seasons. And Matt Painter, if he does not win this year, if he does not get to the Final Four, if he can't get to the Elite Eight, it's like, hey, man, cancel Christmas. You may have to find a new spot, not leave West Lafayette. They're not going to get rid of Matt Painter, certainly. But at the end of the day, Braden Smith needs to get healthy, and this team needs to find a way to crack the code to win the NCAA tournament. You have the most dominant force on the planet in college basketball in Mount Edie, but I do not believe that this team, as deep as they are, with the forwards coming off the bench, bringing in Lance Jones from Southern Illinois, will have the opportunity to play against Tennessee to go to the Final Four. And I believe Tennessee, the SEC champion, they defend, and this is the best scoring team that Rick Barnes has had, shall I say. And I believe he'll be going back to the Final Four, which for me in my brackets, complete the fact there'll be 3 SEC teams and no number 1 seeds will make it.
All right, now you said a few things that I want to dig into. You used the word tough 3 times to describe this Tennessee team, and that's accurate. I don't think anybody can argue with that. But you also made a point at the end there. This is Rick Barnes' best offensive team ever. We all know he's a coach that hangs his hat on defense. It doesn't matter how celebrated a recruit you are. If you don't guard, you don't play. Everybody knows that. Ask Freddie DeLeon. They thought he was going to be the guy this year. That was the plan in the preseason, and then it turned out to be Dalton Knecht. But this is a team that also has a very experienced backcourt around Knecht. Zakai Ziegler, Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi. So they've got guys, and then Jonas Adu up front. I think they can score the ball this year, and that is why I like them a little bit more than in previous years. The thing with Purdue, it all comes down to Braden Smith. If he is healthy, then I still like them. I still think they're the favorite in this region. But he played the last 2 games and was not at 100%. That much was clear. When you start comparing this Purdue team to last year's team, and everybody wants to talk about that narrative, they can't win in the postseason. This is a Purdue team that is different from last year's Purdue team for a number of reasons. Yes, they still have Zach Edey in the middle, and yes, he is still the most dominant player in college basketball. But a year ago, they were one of the slowest teams in the country, and they were a bad shooting team. This year, their tempo is about middle of the pack, and they are the second best 3-point shooting team in the country. And everybody knows it's just basic logic. When you have a dominant big man, the more spacing you can give him to operate, the better you're going to be. The more 3-point shooting you have, the more spacing you have. The other thing, Braden Smith, he was a freshman last year. They started 2 freshmen in the backcourt this year. Those guys are sophomores now, so they're more experienced. So you add the experience, you add the shooting, and you add a little more pace. And I think they've got a chance to have a much different result if they can get over some of those jitters, because they're going to want to win for their coach, and they're going to want to avoid that narrative that he can't win in the postseason. All right, those are the favorites, fellas. It is now time to talk about who could be Cinderella in this region. Isaac, who you got?
Yeah, I'm looking at TCU. There's a lot of data that I look at with Purdue, and they're 25-0 this year when they turn it over less than a fifth of their possessions. It's like if they don't turn it over, they're winning. The thing with TCU is this is one of the best turnover-forcing teams in college basketball. So from a stylistic perspective, a lot of athleticism, a lot of depth, multiple bodies to throw at Zach Edey. If they can get past Utah State, I think there's a scenario where they could give Purdue some real problems, because one thing we've noticed against Purdue, if you can turn them over, it's almost an automatic bucket in transition. TCU needs to thrive off of that. That's kind of their entire game. And so if I was Purdue, I would not be signing up to play TCU in the second round. And I would really love if Utah State and Danny Sprinkle did a favor for me and knocked them off, because that's a TCU team that's really built to accentuate and go after those Purdue flaws that, this is a Purdue team that doesn't have many flaws, but that's one of them. And they have the athleticism to really heat this group up. And if you can turn Purdue over, you have a shot. If you can't, you're toast.
Now, just like Chris just said about Rick Barnes, this is one of Rick Barnes' best offensive teams in recent memory. I will say the same thing about Jamie Dixon. By the numbers, this is his best offensive team since 2018. He is a defensive-minded coach. TCU can score the ball this year. So, and again, they are actually favored in that 8-9 game coming up later this week. Chris, who do you like Cinderella in this region?
This was a tough one for me, but I'm going to go with the Ducks. For me, this is not a sexy team, right? There's nothing great about this team defensively, offensively. Dana Altman is usually an elite offensive coach. He's been to the Final Four, and the Pac-12 was pedestrian at best. Arizona was good, but I think their seeding was hurt, by losing in the Pac-12 tournament, but also, against, if you juxtapose that league versus the Mountain West was the best league on the West Coast. And I think Oregon, and you mentioned about Colorado, and then playing Colorado and beating them in the championship. I believe right now in the championship DNA of winning and being the recency bias of being on a run this time of the year with the coach who understands how to win in March. They're 4-3 on neutral court this year. I just believe that at the end of the day, again, as I said before, the metrics don't favor them in any respect whatsoever, but they have their RPI strength of schedule is tough. It's top 10 in the country. They played a tough schedule. So there's nothing that they're going to see that's going to shock them. The other thing I'll say is this: early in the year, they had injuries. They've overcome injuries. And again, there's about momentum and it's not about the team that you have on paper that you start with. And a lot of people, I know, they look at the season in totality. and so much weight is given to these non-conference wins to start the season off. But when you play a 20-conference schedule, right, when you get in the conference and you're healthy down the stretch and into the conference tournament, that's what matters most, because that's the team that you're going to compete against and you're going to compete with. And I think at the end of the day, some of these teams that got it done and bumped some of these other bubble teams off are like a NC State. You're playing right at the right time, and that momentum matters. And right now, I think the Ducks are flying.
Good matchup for them with South Carolina, because South Carolina doesn't have a tremendous presence at the rim, and Oregon's got N'Faly Dante. So that's a really intriguing matchup that I think that, Isaac said earlier, it's all about the matchups this time of year. And I think that's a tough matchup for South Carolina, as admirable a job as Lamont Paris has done this year. All right, fellas, my sleeper pick. Get ready for this. It's a good one. If you like cinema, you're going to love this. Will Wade and McNeese.
Oh, come on. Stop it, Fink.
They're my sleeper pick. I'll tell you what. First of all, he's got players. He's got players. He's won 30 games. We know he's going to have them ready to play. And when you look at their metrics, now, I know what you're going to say. It's not always about the metrics, but this is the anatomy of an upset. When you shoot the ball really well, when you take care of it on your end, and when you force turnovers on the other end. Will Wade versus Mark Few, I mean, bring on the popcorn. And then if he wins, the one team we haven't talked about yet, he's going to get Bill Self. That's a trendy upset pick right now. Kansas losing to Samford in the first round. I would never pick against Bill Self in the first round of the NCAA tournament. But if he wins, it could be Will Wade versus Bill Self in the second round. I absolutely love that. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. The other thing I will say, I think Virginia snuck in barely into this field. I think they're going to be able to shut down Colorado State, because it's all going to start with the point guard. And if Isaiah Stevens can't score or create, Colorado State's going to struggle. And then I don't think Texas will be able to score on Virginia either. So I think Virginia could be in a position to make some noise as well. Going to wrap this up with a look at the NBA prospects in this region. And it's going to begin, guys, with players like Dalton Knecht. Chris, he is absolutely a first-round pick. I think he's got a chance to play his way into the lottery. Big-time shot maker. His game translates. Kansas is interesting because for all the injuries they have, probably the best NBA prospect is Johnny Furphy. I know he's not their best college player, but he's the one who's trending the most with NBA scouts. He's still young. He's got wing size. He's got wing shooting. So he is another one the NBA scouts are going to be watching closely this week. All right, that's 3 down, 1 to go. Let's keep it moving on to the next, and that is the West region. Last but not least, let's take a look at that bracket where North Carolina, pretty sure they're on the East Coast, but somehow they went out west, got that number 1 seed. And you know the drill at this point. We are going to start. Chris, I will go with you. Who is your favorite in the West region?
Listen, North Carolina has had a tremendous season, coming from where they came last year, not making the tournament, being the number 1 ranked team in the country. Hubert Davis has certainly shown that he has some moxie, and he's deserving of being the lead of one of the best college programs of all time. But unfortunately, I don't believe that they will get past the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think that Alabama will get it done. Nate Oates, he's been knocking at the door a few years, and this is the time that he will have a major win against North Carolina, because I think sometimes Baycott, I don't know where he is sometimes, and RJ Davis is great, but my pick is the Baylor Bears. I believe Baylor and Scott Drew with Jacoby Walter, with Ray J. Dennis, RJ Dennis, Jaden Nunn, the transfer from BCU. I believe that these guys have the firepower, along with Langston Love, that firepower to get it done. They played in an elite league like the Big 12, so there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to surprise them. I think they get past Arizona. I think Nevada upsets Arizona, and I think that they play Nevada to go on to play Alabama to go to the Final Four. And Isaac, you mentioned before, and we've talked about this, it's about matchups. When you look at the tournament, surely you can say who the best teams are. But where they're seated and how they match up, you look at the different teams and you say, okay, this team, if they played in their league, they would never survive. But in this situation, in the NCAA tournament, can Baylor get past said team? Can Kentucky, right, get past said team? In this group, in this bracket, UNC, I don't believe, in just my opinion, can get to the Final Four and get past Alabama, because Alabama is one of the best teams in the country, the best three-point shooting team. I think athletically, they can defend them. And more importantly, when it gets to Baylor, I believe Baylor is the wild card that people aren't looking at, that has an opportunity to do something amazing for Scott Drew and get back to the national championship game once again. I'm picking the Bears. Sick 'em.
I'll tell you what, Baylor has 6 different players who average in double figures. And if you've ever been to Waco, I watched practice last year. Remember, I said to Scott Drew at the end, I said, I honestly thought that culture of joy thing or positivity, I thought that was just marketing, but this is honestly the happiest college basketball team I've ever been around. It is legit when you go down there. Isaac, who is your favorite in this region?
I'm going to stick chalk and go with Carolina. I don't know if I love it, but that's kind of where I keep going at, because Arizona has some flaws. I think Baylor is a really, really dangerous team too. I'm right there with Chris, but I do think there are some flaws on that resume, especially on the defensive end. Teams keep going at Ray J. Dennis repeatedly on defense, and that's an area of concern. Alabama's defense has really trended in the wrong direction lately. St. Mary's, I'm not sure if they can score at a high level. And so that leads me back to Carolina. And the beauty of this team is I don't think they're as talented as they were last year, but these pieces fit together so snugly. Like, I think the transfer portal gets of Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan and even Jalen Withers have really just complemented the star tandem of Armando Bacot and RJ Davis. And I don't think Bacot's even had his best offensive season, but there's no doubt in my mind he's been playing at an elite level defensively. And RJ Davis, runaway ACC player of the year, he's going to be the best player on the floor, I think, in every matchup that he goes up against throughout this bracket. That gives you a chance. And this team, too, has some nasty in them. Like, they punked Duke, not once, but twice. And that has just stuck in my head a lot, because they are just a different looking group, and they play a little bit differently. There's not a lot of finesse with this team. They can really punk you on the offensive glass, the defensive glass. You feel them on the other end. So there's some question marks with Carolina's ability to guard lead guards, and they're going to see a bunch of them, right? Josh Hubbard, Tyson Walker, Mark Sears. Like, this group is full of them. Caleb Love, right? If we could get the Caleb Love Carolina reunion, that'd be really, really fun. But I do think that this group has just enough nasty in them to make a deep, deep run. Like, this team just feels different, and I'm kind of aboard the train.
All right, fellas. Now, Chris, you mentioned this. I think Alabama's got a shot. Now, let me say, I think that first round game is a tough one. Charleston is a very good mid-major team. They are dangerous because they can get hot from the three-point line. So I think if Alabama gets through that and doesn't overlook them, that's the thing. They got to guard. Alabama's got to come out and guard in that opening round game. But when you start moving past that, this is a team under Nate Oates that has one of the very best, top 2, in fact, offenses in the entire country. They play with a ton of pace. They play with a ton of shooting. It's been well documented, his commitment to the analytics. Don't tell him they don't matter, because he'll have something to say to Jim Boeheim about that. He's on KenPom. Take my word for it. This is a team that is going to be very, very dangerous, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens if they run into North Carolina. Isaac, you mentioned Mark Sears. This guy's averaging 21 points, about 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and his shooting splits are off the charts. 50% from the floor, 43% from 3, and 86 from the free throw line. Aaron Estrada is a really quality running mate. So this is an Alabama team that I think has to get past a tough Charleston team in the opening round, but if they do, could certainly make a run. All right, fellas, we will wrap this up with our final Cinderella picks in this last region. Isaac, I will start with you.
Well, I think New Mexico got the shaft from the committee with this seed. This is an egregious seed to give them an 11. They're one of the top 25 teams on KenPom. All their other 11 seeds are well outside of this top 40 range. And this team has guards. What wins in March? Guard play. Donovan Dent. If you haven't heard the name, you better get used to it, because he is a fantastic maestro in pick and rolls. Just unbelievable vision. Jalen House can basically make any play on the floor. Unbelievable. He's a guy who can come off ball screens and get to his pull-up, and it's nasty. He can get to the free throw line. He can get to the lane and finish with really nice touch. You get him out in transition, or he's ripping ball handlers, getting out in transition for layups. He's one of the best thieves in all of college basketball. And then Jamal Mashburn Jr., right? Another mid-range assassin. So this group has great guard play. I'm really bullish on JT Toppin, one of the better freshmen so far this year in college basketball. And when you have guards and you have a chance and you're underseeded, I think they're going to come in with a real edge. They're favored over Clemson in this first round game. Like, they are the better team than the 6th seed. So this is a really, really dangerous group. And you look forward to that potential Baylor matchup. That could be first to 90 with these two teams.
Committee was transparent. They said New Mexico was not in until they won their conference tournament. So they obviously have something to prove here. Chris, who do you like for your West Cinderella?
Just to jump on a little bit what Isaac said, I mean, they had to win their league because they had some tough losses and they could not win at the Pit. I worked at New Mexico, very tough place to play, and they couldn't get it done. And Rich Pitino, shout out to him for the job that he's done. And I'll say this about the New Mexico Clemson game. It is a big game in one respect. A lot of people like myself do not believe that the Mountain West deserves 6 teams and they're as tough as that league as they are. So they need to win that game, even though they got a lot of low seeds. They need to show the committee and reward them for putting so many teams in. The team that I like, it's funny, and I'm going to say this, is Nevada. Now, I worked for Steve Alford, and Nevada finished 1 game behind Utah State in winning the Mountain West. It was a tough league and a bunch of quad 1 wins in that league. And they did beat TCU, neutral site in Hawaii. Jamie Dixon did get ejected from that game. They did win at Washington. That was a quad 1 win as well. But it's going to come down to this. Craig Noodles Nils and Steve Alford, you guys know that dynamic duo, that tandem. Can they, right, do enough offensively? They've been an elite defensive team this year, right, particularly in their league. But they don't shoot the 3 well, right? But they do get to the foul line. As I mentioned before, styles make fights. And when you get to the NCAA tournament, and Steve Alford has been one of those guys, remember at UCLA when he had Lonzo Ball and they got a couple of Sweet 16s, can they push through? And a lot of people got to understand the Mountain West, up until what San Diego State did last year, was a league that struggled to win in the NCAA tournament, period. And San Diego State obviously had that breakthrough and went to the Final Four. This will be a testament of what this season really is. You talk about Danny Sprinkle, who returned 0 points and won the league. So the coach in me says, well, how good can that league be if a guy returns 0 points and wins the league? But at the end of the day, the metrics favor the Mountain West, 7th best league. They did a great job of competing Nevada, as I said before. But it's going to come down to Keenan Blackshear, Jared Lucas, an elite 3-point shooter. If he has an elite game, Keenan Blackshear is a guard who can isolate, big guard, get to the rim. But as I said before, if they can't make threes, I'm never for teams that cannot make threes. It's just very difficult. But again, also the other side of that coin is if they can stop you from making threes and they can get to the foul line and make it a mud wrestling event, and make it a rock fight, and have an elite coach like Steve Alford, who's one of 4 coaches to take 5 teams to the NCAA tournament, they can have a chance as well. That's my sleeper.
Chris, I love that call too, because Nick Davidson, complete stud, does everything to impact winning.
All right, guys, you know who I like here? I like Grand Canyon. Again, I'm going to say it's just an intriguing storyline. It's not just Scott Drew in this bracket. It's Bryce Drew as well. He's been here before with Grand Canyon, and he's got a player named Tyon Grant Foster, who, Isaac, you did a feature on earlier this year. And he's, in my opinion, one of the best individual stories in college basketball. Former junior college product, went to Kansas, then transferred to DePaul. Halftime of his first game at DePaul, he had 9 points at halftime. He suffered a cardiac arrest. It took him out of basketball for 2 years. He was finally cleared around this time last year. He came back to the court and put himself in the transfer portal as a grad transfer. Grand Canyon took him. And then you know what's happened? He won Player of the Year in the conference. Then he won Conference Tournament Player of the Year. And he has been nothing short of sensational. He does it all from all levels. Isaac, want to give you a chance just to jump in here because I know you dug super deep into this story, and it is admittedly one of the best stories of all of college basketball this season.
Yeah, he collapsed once at halftime. He also collapsed a second time at an open gym with Christian Brown a little bit later.
People don't talk about, right? Everybody talks about the DePaul game. People don't talk about the one back in Kansas City.
He legitimately thought he was never going to play again. And it's so cool when you see guys like this win. He's coming back and playing at a really high level. Tyon Grant Foster, the best story in college basketball this year.
No doubt about it. All right. Well, it concludes our breakdown of the 4 regions. But that takes us to Phoenix and the Final Four. And it's no preview show. if we're not talking about who our individual picks are. So when we get to that Final Four, who is going to come out as the national champion? Chris, I'm going to start with you. Who's your pick to win it all? We know it's not a number one seed.
It's definitely not a number one seed, but I do have Auburn playing Tennessee for the right to win the national championship. And I'm going to say, it's going to be crazy, but Rick Barnes gets it done and the Vols win the national championship.
All right. Kevin Durant's not walking through that door, but it does not matter. I know he went to Texas. Isaac, who do you like as your national champion favorite?
Give me two of the best teams in the country in the preseason, UConn against Duke, and I'll ride with UConn. Danny Hurley getting that repeat. It gets boring, but this team just feels like they have very little flaws. You got to play almost a perfect game to beat them. I'm not sure anybody can.
Guys, I'll say this. I think UConn has the hardest draw of the number one seeds. I know they're the number one overall seed, but as I said in the opener, I think they have the hardest draw, and it's going to begin with a matchup with Auburn as early as the Sweet 16, and that might include Florida Atlantic a game before. It's going to be a long road for the Huskies, but they have been, as Danny Hurley says, clearly the best team in college basketball this season. Things have to go right. They have to stay healthy, and that's the thing I don't think we talk about enough, is that to win a national championship, you can't just be good. You also have to be a little bit lucky to win 6 games over the course of 3 weeks. So they've got to be lucky, as anybody would, and not suffer any injuries, see the ball go in a little bit more. But I think right now this is the best team in college basketball until someone else proves otherwise. But as we said, the road to Phoenix is daunting. I do think they have the hardest path to a national championship of any of the number one seeds. Fellas, can't thank you enough for doing this. I hope everybody enjoyed this breakdown, but don't go anywhere. Chris and Isaac are going to sign off, and now we are going to turn our attention to the transfer portal, because although Selection Sunday happened yesterday, Monday meant the beginning of free agency, so to speak, in college basketball with the opening of the transfer portal. And joining me to break all this down is going to be two of my 247 colleagues, but here's what you need to know. There is a 45-day window from March 18th to May 1st. Multiple-time transfers will be allowed to transfer again without penalty. That was not the case last year, or I should say that was not the perception. It really could have changed player movement last year if players knew they would be immediately eligible to transfer a second time. There's a pause in policing and investigating collectives talking with transfers. So what that means is if you are a potential transfer and you're trying to figure out exactly how much NIL money you can get from a particular school, you can have a direct conversation, not just with the coaching staff, but with the collective itself, maybe even sign a contract. That's something that I'm sure Travis Branham will get into more as we go here. Those are the things you need to know about this year in the transfer portal and why it is going to be an absolutely unprecedented time. And in order to help me break that down, I'm going to bring in 247 Sports National Basketball Director Eric Bossi, as well as the czar of the transfer portal, Travis Branham. Fellas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us on.
All right. Now, Trav, your over-under on tweets so far today is about 30. So this is, in full disclosure, what's going to be fun about this next hour is that as we break down the transfer portal, we are going to give you the news as it happens in real time. So if you hear buzzing of the phones or anything like that, just make sure you check out the phone. Travis is going to let you know exactly what is happening as it rolls in. But the first thing I want to do is give us an idea of just how important the portal is. And I want to take a look at the list of guys who were first-year players at their respective programs this year and just see the level of impact they have had on college basketball. Guys like Max A. Smith, second team All Big 12. LJ Cryer, we talked about him earlier at Houston. Second team All Big 12 as well. Ray J. Dennis, second team All Big 12. Hunter Dickinson, the newcomer of the year. And of course, Dalton Connect is on a level all by himself. So again, joining me to break all this down is we see other players like Graham Ike, Harrison Ingram, David Jones, Jordan King. It is a long list of players. Of course, Dalton Connect, he is the tip of the spear when it comes to immediate impact transfers. Fellas, it's the day after Selection Sunday. We should be talking exclusively about the brackets, but instead the focus, especially for you, Trav, is on the portal. So first I want to talk about the timing of this because people have really pushed back. Is this an appropriate day for the portal to open? Travis, I will start with you.
It's kind of a double-edged question here because ideally, no, it's not the perfect day to open up the transfer portal. But at the same time, if you do push this back, you're going to be running back into the high school calendar. We just changed the NCAA high school calendar from April live periods in which coaches used to go out and watch these high school kids on the AAU circuit. Now it has been moved to May to accommodate the transfer portal and all these visits. Now this year, of course, we have a new complaint, and that is the transfer portal date is the day after Selection Sunday. Yes, of course, it's not ideal. All these teams are playing in the NCAA tournament. Teams are frankly sitting out of the NIT so they can focus on the portal. So not a good day. Now, what is the actual solution? Because if you do push this back and you keep it a 45-day window, which was also a change because it was 60 days last year. So they're trying to accommodate all these wishes, yet everybody still has complaints. If it were me, if I was the NCAA commissioner and I had rules, or if I had to say on the rules, I would shrink this down to a 30-day window. I would push it back as far as I could, close to the Final Four. And then I would probably reopen, or I guess reshuffle the summer high school schedule to expand the days. Bossy has been around this game a long time. We were actually just texting about it not too long ago, where during June or July, I used to be able to go out for several days on end without really any sort of governing from the NCAA in terms of these were the specific weekends. No, it was like a 10-day period. I would be much more apt to going back to a structure like that. That way it accommodates everything. And also these college coaches have the freedom and the autonomy to kind of determine their own schedules. It takes the pressure off in a lot of different ways. So if I'm the commissioner here, if I had to say, that's how I'd go about it. But again, no matter how you slice this thing, everybody's going to have complaints. Credit to the NCAA to some degree for trying to accommodate what all the college coaches were saying over the last year. So I guess you just can't please everybody.
Well, here's my thing too. I think ultimately you have to be able to police it because, in my opinion, the reason the portal is open today is because the NCAA knows schools are going to start to contact players and their representatives right now, and they have no way to prevent it. So they might as well allow everyone to do it. The reality is it's been happening long before today as well, but they just have no way of stopping it. And until we empower them, or until they figure out a way to win a lawsuit or defend themselves against the lawsuit, I guess I should say, they're not going to be able to police it. And so it's literally the Wild West. Today is the day that it officially happens. But the three of us know these players have been contacted throughout the course of the year. And yeah, that's just the reality of current basketball, that you have to prepare for the NCAA tournament and simultaneously be working towards next year's roster. Bossy, this is my question for you as the OG of the group here. Is this just the new norm in the world of recruiting and roster construction? Because when I say recruiting, I mean the ability to recreate your roster on any given year.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I'm glad you brought up the point about the fact that maybe today is the official day of the transfer portal opening, but we're all being pretty naive if we think that schools haven't been active in the transfer portal through back channels, or that agents haven't been active in reaching out to find out who is interested and who won't be interested. So you've got to get it started at some date. And no matter when you pick it, people are going to complain about it. It's just the nature of things. You can't please everyone. But yeah, it's the new normal. Coaches forever have wanted to be able to get older and stay older. And now they've got a way to do it like never before, especially now since we're going to have two-time transfers being able to be eligible with no impact to their eligibility. Whereas last year, before Raekwon Battle went and sued the NCAA, it was made very clear by the NCAA, we are not going to clear any of these second-time transfers. But now it's a total free-for-all, and we've essentially created college basketball free agency.
All right, and one of the players who is already garnering significant interest is Pepperdine transfer Houston Millett, who is going to join us on today's show. So we are very excited to bring him into our broadcast here, joining you live on the 247 Sports channel. Houston, welcome to the show.
Good to be on.
All right, great. Now, first things first, you've been at Pepperdine for 3 years now. What went into the decision for you to put your name into the portal?
What went in my decision was Coach Romar was let go. I have a really close relationship with Coach Romar. I love Coach Romar. He's the best. He's actually the reason why I stayed. Like, just his impact on me as a as a person has been second to none, and I love Coach Romar. The way the school handled everything, I wasn't a big fan of, but I won't get into that. But just him being let go, especially for the conference tournament, I wanted to get my name out there early to kind of show that I have Coach Romar's back and that I love him.
So for the fans watching, players like yourself, when you undergo a coaching change, you are given a 30-day window to enter the portal. So you actually entered the portal last week before the portal officially opened. So I can only imagine you've been getting blown up by several schools all across the country. Who all have you heard from so far? I am assuming Coach Romar has been in contact since he got hired on Royal and Marymount.
Yeah, it's been, man, a ton of schools have reached out. Yeah, I mean, it's been crazy. My phone's been blowing up like consistently each day. I've been able to talk to a lot of coaches, kind of figure out what I'm very interested in, what doesn't fit. But there have been a ton of schools that have reached out, and I'm just really blessed for that opportunity.
Hey, Houston, Eric Bossy here. Questions are, what's ultimately going to factor in your decision? NIL is a hot button or a hot topic right now, and that's very important to some kids. Conference affiliation is a big factor. And of course, you guys are student athletes, and there are still a lot of you out there for who academics are really important. What's most important to you when figuring this all out?
I would say the most important thing to me is, number one for sure, is like where I'm going to be at in terms of like fit and opportunity. That's the biggest thing for me. I only have 1 year left of eligibility. So I want to go to a place I can, have an impact on the team, have a main role, whatever that is, mostly in the category of leading. I want to be able to lead and just go to a place where I can have a lot of fun and have an opportunity to play at the next level. I'd say those are the big things. NIL, of course, it's a big topic, but that's not the main pusher. I don't have an agent, so I just pretty much talk to schools myself. And it's kind of been funny because I've been able to talk to schools, and there's some of them has been surprised they're just talking to me instead of like an agent trying to negotiate a deal. I'm still a fan of like the college game. You got to have a relationship with the coach. So those things I'd say is most important for me. And then, environment. I want to go to a place that embraces basketball. Pepperdine, there was no culture there in terms of like athletically. And I want to go to a place that embraces not just me, but the sports, my teammates, and has a culture of wanting to see everybody succeed. So those are the biggest things for me.
All right, Houston, no one could blame you for wanting to go to a place where basketball is a big deal. And assuming you find a place like that, what would you tell that fan base that they are getting in you? What kind of game do you play?
The game I play is I am extremely passionate. I love the game of basketball. I study it. I am obsessed with basketball. They're getting to someone who's going to show his emotions and play with a reckless abandon, play with his heart on his sleeve. That's who I am. That's who I am as a person. That's who my parents raised me to be. They're going to get someone who wants to sacrifice, a leader, someone who's going to sacrifice for the betterment of the team, and someone who just wants to go out there and win, do whatever it takes to win, whether that be shooting, whether that be passing, rebounding, diving on the floor, taking charges. All those things I know I can do. I can impact the game. But mostly someone who's going to sacrifice and want to win for our program.
For those that don't know, your dad was quite the athlete himself. Played football and track at James Madison, who in their own right on the basketball court is having one heck of a season. But he's also the AD at UC Riverside. Talk about your relationship with him and just how valuable it is to have a guy like that with this kind of knowledge and wisdom about this industry in your corner.
Yeah, I love my dad. He's been there every step of the way, guiding me throughout this journey. He's worked in college athletics since I was probably like 8, maybe 9 years old. So I've got to see at Cal, he was with Jaylen Brown, Jared Goff, Ivan Rabb, Missy Franklin, like all these top premier athletes that I got to watch and see. So he's been amazing. He's been with me every step of the way. We have this thing with him and my high school coach, Jeff Barakoff. It's called the 3-man weave, and pretty much everything basketball related, life related goes through them. So I love that. I'd like to say my dad's my best friend, but he always tells me, I'm not your friend, I'm your father. So, I love my dad. He's awesome.
Houston, that's pretty cool. It sounds like you have great people guiding you through the process, and we wish you the best of luck in this decision-making process and then next year as a senior in college basketball. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
Really appreciate it.
All right, that is Houston Millett, one of the biggest names in the portal so far. As we continue on with this show, Trav, we're going to give you full autonomy here. If there's breaking news, you just jump in and shout it from the rooftops. But assuming your phone is not buzzing at this very moment, going to start with this. Who are some of the other big names in the portal as we speak? These are guys who are officially in the portal, not just rumored to be there.
Yeah, let's just keep it with Pepperdine. Houston has two extremely talented teammates. First off, in Javon Porter, we used to have him ranked in the top 100 of the 2022 recruiting class, if I'm not mistaken there. And then also, he also has Michael Ajayi, who just played his first season of Division I basketball, a 6'7" wing with a 7-foot wingspan, just 20 years old. He was the leading scorer on that team, a very versatile, strong wing who can slash and make shots out on the perimeter. But again, we are also getting more and more players announcing their intentions to hit the portal, which those are typically the bigger names at this moment. But another big name to keep an eye on is Amari Williams out of Drexel. He's 3-time Defensive Player of the Year in the CAA conference. And he's a big, long, strong, and powerful big man that is testing the NBA draft waters, but he will also be going through the transfer process. And I would imagine just about every high major basketball team amongst the biggest college basketball programs in the country will all be calling him if they're in need of a big man.
Now, if you were watching this show last week, you remember we talked about some of the programs who are going to need big classes in the portal, and it was some of the very most notable blue bloods in the country. We talked about UConn, who is looking to defend their national championship. We talked about Kansas, a program that has had a lot of success in the portal and will need to do it again. Bossy, before we shift and talk about some of the players that you recently wrote about as graduating seniors who could elect to come back and use their COVID year, is there anybody else on that list of available transfers that you'd like to add to? And let me preface it by this. I think we are all aware of the fact that some of the biggest names that are going to go into the portal are not yet in there. So right now we have some of the guys who are really established at the mid-major level and hoping to make a name for themselves. They all see the Dalton Connects and they see those success stories and they want to try and fall in that line. Is there anybody else you would add to that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. He's not coming from a mid-major, but Brandon Garrison, Oklahoma State freshman, to me, is the biggest name in the portal so far and is going to remain as one of the biggest big man prospects in there. He's a McDonald's All-American. We had ranked in the top 50, I think even top 40 coming out of high school. A little bit of a slow start at Oklahoma State and didn't always have the best stats out there. I think he only ended up averaging around 7.5 points and 5 rebounds. But if you watch this kid play, he can go. He gets stuff done on both ends of the floor. He's got ability as a rim protector. I think he's got a little bit of ability to step out on the floor and do some things that we've not yet seen yet. But he's a guy who had a couple of games during Big 12 play where you saw the flashes of, oh, okay, this guy can not only help out a high-level team win and potentially pursue a national championship, but he's a guy who is going to be squarely on the NBA radar sooner than later. So to me, he's the biggest name to enter it so far. He would be the biggest prize to enter it so far. And there's going to be a big battle for him. I would expect Kansas and Oklahoma to be two names to monitor immediately on that one. And there's going to be a lot more joining him.
And you know, I always like Brandon and Trav. I'm coming to you. I know there's another name at Oklahoma State. I know it's coming. But what I would add about Brandon Garrison is that I always thought his ability to process the game was really, really high from that front court, from that center spot. I know no big kid likes to be called the center, but his ability to think the game, to play out of the short roll, you see it there, score with both hands. He's really done a terrific job of getting into great shape. But as promised, we know that is not the only big name to come out of Oklahoma State. So Travis, who else has joined Brandon Garrison so far today from the Oklahoma State program?
Yeah, he actually hasn't entered the portal yet, but he will be. The expectation is he'll actually enter in about a week, and that is Javon Small. He transferred from East Carolina last year, was a guy that was expected to come in and just contribute to the Oklahoma State program. But he came in, started, and made a massive impact that, frankly, I don't think anybody saw coming. And so now he's going to be entering the portal. Like I said, in about a week is the expectation as of right now. And when he does, all the high major teams are also going to be calling. He will have 1 year remaining, but that's not the breaking news that I was wanting to come down with here. We actually just had another guard enter. He will be one of the top guards in the portal alongside Javon Small, and that is Doug McDaniel out of Michigan. He's a former 4-star recruit out of Paul VI Catholic and Team Takeover. Went to Michigan because of his relationship to Juwan Howard. That was a very unique relationship that the two had there that ultimately got his commitment out of high school. But now, since Juwan Howard has been fired, Doug has decided to put his name in the portal and is now able to be talking to others options. And one, I guess, curiosity is, will he just go back home? There's so much talent, or so many coaches around the area of the DMV that can't help but wonder, will he go back and play for a guy like Ed Cooley here in the coming months? So that is breaking news. Doug McDaniel has entered the transfer portal.
All right, that is interesting. And that is going to lead us to a whole nother conversation. And that is the implication when there are coaching changes. Basi, one of the questions I want to ask, though, is in the beginning of this hour, we talked about how collectives now are being granted permission, or at least being told they can't be penalized for talking directly to players. I guess my question, and I'll pose this to both of you, but Basi, I will start with you. In the event of a coaching change, you would think that also extends to their current players. That used to be the train of thought. Don't fire your coach unless you know what you're going to do, because you don't want to be without a coach for too long, because you'll lose your whole roster. Is that even applicable anymore if your collective can talk to your players and say, hey, we don't know who your coach is yet, but we know we can guarantee you X amount of dollars?
Well, I think that depends a lot on how strong your collective is and how good they've been about coming through with the actual payments on this. Because let's be frank here, we hear a lot of numbers get thrown around or rumored to be that kids are getting from collectives. Not all of these collectives are coming through on that money. So transfers, you're out there, make sure you speak to the kids at the school you're thinking about going to make sure they're getting their money. And also, of course, it's not just about the collective. As you have an agent, your agent should also be working to find you actual true NIL opportunities outside of the collective. And that's a whole subject for another thing. But yeah, the collective is a big part. They're absolutely talking to these kids, especially the ones that they would like to keep around. And I'm sure they're probably more in the know of the job search than anyone else, because they got to be able to talk to these kids about, hey, we think it's going to be one or two of these guys. What would it take for you to stick around? So there's a lot going into that, but still, I think you have to assume at the end of the day that if you're losing your coach, more of your players are going to enter the portal than not. And those that you're going to keep, you're going to have to really fight for. But the collective being able to get contact with them now is certainly a help.
I want to drill down into something you just said. For the fans who are watching at home, you mentioned true NIL versus the collective. For the college basketball fan that is playing catch up today, because it is the day the portal opens and doesn't follow the nuances of this process in the same depth that we do, what's the difference between true NIL versus collectives? That you just give me the 30-second explanation of that.
Sure. The collective is a group that's, funded by donors that basically negotiates with the players and comes up with a more or less a salary. Let's just call it what it is, that they're going to get over the course of a year per month. That's coming from the collective. That's what you're signing on for. But true NIL is going out into the local community or even broader and getting actual, endorsement deals, hooking up with the local pizza place and getting a slice named after you, hawking things for the local car wash, going and signing autographs. Part of this isn't just how much money can you get from the collective. I would think, just as a little tip to transfers out there, be talking to agents about what they can secure for you outside of the collective, and be talking to coaches and players at the schools you're looking into about what opportunities they've been able to get outside of the collective. Because while 200 from one collective may beat 150 from another collective, you might be able to get another extra 100 to 150 around campus at a school with less money in the collective than you could from one with more money in the collective. Don't just think about that collective number. There's a lot more to it, especially for some guys who have a little bit of marketing pop to them.
All right, now, guys, another thing as it relates to the coaching carousel and its impact on the portal, are the coaches who could get new jobs, perceived better jobs, and bring players with them. And I think that's a factor that we've got to consider in a couple different examples this year. Dusty May at Florida Atlantic, he was a hot name on the carousel last year. He opted to return to FAU and bring back his entire roster, presumably with a collective commitment. That's the only way it would have happened. Now, this year, Indiana did not open. He was expected to be a candidate there if it did. Ohio State retained Jake Diebler. He was expected to be a candidate there. If he were to pursue another job, there are questions about could he take players with him. John L. Davis is someone that has a 5th year of eligibility. Similarly, Drake, you have Darian DeVries. His son Tucker could theoretically follow him to another school. Now, those players are not in the portal, and so we're not going to speculate on their status. But what I want to ask you from a general kind of standpoint, viewpoint, Travel, start with you. How much more attractive are mid-major coaches if they are perceived to have immediate access to or connection to immediate impact players?
I mean, it's obviously definitely something that I guess promotes leverage with the mid-major coach. I would say it's not a guarantee that these players will follow them, though. We saw with Rick Pitino last year when he goes to St. John's, he has a few of his players follow him. I'm drawing a major blank right now, but he lost arguably his best player from Iona down to Florida this past year, who's been one of the best transfers in impact transfers in the SEC this season. He did bring in Danis Jenkins, but again, looking at what Rick Pitino, an absolute legend of this sport, did, get St. John's, and not every single player did follow him, but he got enough. He did end up having a strong finish to the season, although they did miss the NCAA tournament. So let's just say hypothetically, if Dusty May does indeed get Louisville, I would assume at least a couple of these players will follow him, but it's not a guarantee that they all will.
Using the Hall of Famer as the example, it's a terrific point about how the perception isn't always the reality. If Rick Pitino didn't bring in everybody, and you're talking about players who went on, Walter Clayton's at Florida, I think the expectation was he was going to St. John's. That didn't come to fruition. So it's a terrific point about expectations versus reality. As it pertains to the coaching carousel, Travis just broke the news here live on the 247 Sports College Basketball Show that Doug McDaniel had entered the portal from Michigan. This comes shortly after Michigan had fired Juwan Howard. Of course, they are not the only program who has had a change in leadership. We've seen Washington fire Mike Hopkins. We've seen Stanford move on from Jared Haas. So there's a few different examples. How does it, Basi, I'm going to go to you with this, but how many of these players do we expect to enter the portal? Is it automatic at this point that if there's a coaching change that these guys are going to go into the portal and at least test the market? That's something that we talked with Trav about last week, is players testing the market just to see what their value is, even if they don't necessarily want to leave.
Yeah, I think so. Sure, they're going to go in and test the market at some point, or they're going to, at a minimum, do some significant back channeling research to find out what type of market there will be if they were going to go in, because sometimes it's just not worth going in if there's not going to be much of a market for you, or if people are telling you you're going to have unreasonable demands. But yeah, they're going to look around. You know, we see Cannon Carlisle is already into the portal. I believe Trav reported earlier that Andrei Stojakovic is expected to enter the portal from Stanford. So those are some pretty big names. You know, we've got Doug McDaniel from Michigan in. We haven't seen any of the guys. We didn't see any of the guys from Ohio State enter, but they did a good job in hiring Jake Diebler first, and now he's got to withstand what's going on with things. But yeah, we're going to see them. You know, I would expect we're going to see. We saw Colin Smith enter from Vanderbilt almost immediately with Jerry Stackhouse fired. You know, we had Houston Millett on earlier. We saw him and the other players from Pepperdine entered early. So pretty much once your coach is gone, the guys are going to enter. But like you said, there are guys you can bring along. You mentioned Mike Hopkins being fired at Washington. The hot name up there is Danny Sprinkle from Utah State, who brought a lot of his players from Montana State to Utah State. And there's a good chance he could do that if he were to get a job like Washington, in particular, a big man like Great Osborne, who could come in and be an impact Big Ten player. So there's an awful lot of play here.
Those let's dig more into those Stanford freshmen, because they were a big reason why Stanford brought back Jared Haas this year. Cannon Carlisle and, of course, Stojakovic, who actually announced his commitment to Stanford live here on the 247 Sports channel. I think Carlisle is one of the best players in the portal right now, or at least, shall we say, on the market. I'm not sure if he officially hit yet. This is a guy who started his season late, but when he did, he made an immediate splash. A shot maker who was at overtime elite last year and didn't necessarily convert as high a percentage from behind the arc as we expected, but this year in the Pac-12 showed that he was capable of getting hot and scoring in bunches on any given night. After a big game early in the year, or at least I should say in late December, I inserted him on the draftables list because he was getting some significant buzz amongst the NBA draft community that honestly was just looking for new names this year. Trav, what can you tell us about Stojakovic and kind of the gains that he has made this year, and maybe what his recruitment could look like given what he went through the first time in the process, or if that might not have anything to do with it at all?
Yeah, I would think that fans will probably look at his statistics at Stanford this past season, who again didn't make the NCAA tournament, and probably be a little underwhelmed. But he was a freshman this year and needed time to really build some strength, get stronger, and mature his game. And what has always stood out about Andre has been his shot making from three. He's got the size, he's got the length. He's very skilled, and he's got very advanced footwork for a wing. So despite the underwhelming numbers, again, I do think the fans will probably look at this and say he's a former McDonald's All-American, just averaging 8 points a game. Now, I still think a lot of these high major programs all across the country will still be very, very interested, not only given the past history of what we've seen in high school, but also the pedigree. He is the son of Peja Stojakovic. And anytime you have the son of an NBA All-Star, you are definitely going to lean in and bet on the upside. So he's one guy that I think could come, again, he's obviously going to transfer, but year 2, year 3 can make massive leaps.
All right, now, as we start to pivot away and examine some new kind of subplots within the portal, I want to remind everybody that as breaking news happens and comes in, Travis is going to continue to update us. We've already heard how Doug McDaniel from Michigan entered his name into the portal while we were on the air. Travis broke that live here on the 247 Sports College Basketball Show, and we will continue to do that throughout the remainder of the show. But while we await more names to announce they are headed to the portal, Bossy, I want to revisit an article you wrote, I believe it was about 10 days ago, and this was the impact of the COVID year. There are a number of true college basketball stars that are in their senior year of college right now. So presumably they're going to finish with a degree, but they also now have the option to return to college basketball. I would argue or venture to say that some of these players have a higher earning potential returning to college basketball than they do going pro next year. I know that sounds like an oxymoron to say they're going to make more money by remaining amateurs, and indeed it probably is, but nonetheless, these are the times we live in. So, Bossy, as we look at some of these players who are seniors, but who could return for a fifth year, who are some of the more notable ones that we should know about?
I would say the two that jump immediately out to me are Hunter Dickinson at Kansas and RJ Davis at North Carolina. You know, Dickinson is first team All Big Ten player after being an all Big Ten player at Michigan, walking double-double, you know, maybe not the most athletic guy around, which is what is limiting his NBA stock right now, but that guy can put up some serious numbers on the college level, and in today's age is probably worth a pretty good chunk of change. I think it's safe to say that he's already doing pretty well from an NIL standpoint at Kansas, so he could probably improve on that deal. Or man, if a guy like him wanted to hit the transfer portal, you know, there would certainly be a pretty intense conversation among the various collectives out there what to get him. And then our guy like RJ Davis, now he's really interesting because he's the ACC Player of the Year. He's a first-team All-American. He doesn't fit the prototype of a conventional NBA player because he's a pretty smallish two-guard. But, man, he can really shoot the ball, and that's what the NBA really values right now. And he's on a team in North Carolina that has a legitimate chance to make a run to a Final Four. So he's got a chance to be where, like, maybe he's not projected to get picked right now. He could potentially move himself into the second round where people would at least guarantee him a minimum of a two-way, which I think he could get if he came out anyway. So you're looking at potentially $700,000 to $800,000 there on a two-way. But he's a kid who, if you were to believe some of the numbers that are going around, could command $1 million between NIL and various opportunities out there to stay in college for a year. And that's a real decision to make. And maybe with some of the guys that aren't quite at the level of a Dickinson and a Davis, it creates an interesting dilemma for a college coach. We know what we've got from this guy so far. Is he going to be able to elevate us next year? Or is it time for us to say, you know what? We've appreciated what you've done here, but you know what, man? Feel free to go ahead and test that transfer market. We need to get somebody else in because we maybe need to go a different direction. There's a lot of layers to this.
Well, and we're talking about two programs that already have a documented history of returning fifth-year transfers. Now, the thing that makes it tricky is none of these numbers are publicized. We haven't even had signed contracts yet. So we don't know what Armando Bacot got to go back to North Carolina. We don't know if he got what he was expecting to get. We don't know what Kevin McCullough got when he went back to Kansas. We don't know if he got what he expected to get. Now, I will say that players obviously talk, and I don't think they would be developing these traction at places like North Carolina and Kansas of bringing players back if those players weren't getting what they thought they would get. We're not going to dig into these examples, but the three of us all know there are plenty of players who did not get what they think they did. So while it's being reported sometimes as an injury or a nagging ankle injury, sometimes there is more to those stories than we are being led to believe. But let me ask you specifically about, I don't want to call it buying power, although a better definition eludes me at the moment. But when we're talking about those types of programs, the Kansases, the North Carolinas that have built national championship contenders in large part in recent years out of the transfer portal. And now the portal is going to open even wider because two-time transfers are going to be allowed. We're running out of the COVID years. I think this is the last year that we'll have the consistent players who are in that 2020-21 season and thus get that season back. But I do want to ask you, and Trav, I will start with you here. When you talk about those programs that have consistently been able to recruit those older players, I want to compare and contrast those, the likes of North Carolina and Kansas, who have gotten big name transfers, but still recruited the high school ranks at a high level and have still gotten some player retention, versus others, and I won't say names specifically, although who knows if I'll slip in a few minutes, who've gone exclusively portal. Is it misleading to think you can build a roster exclusively from the portal in this day and age?
Absolutely. Going full portal poses quite a bit of risk. Now, if you're getting portal transfers that have multiple years of eligibility remaining, now you're kind of getting into this middle ground where it's not too, or it's a little similar to high school while also obviously mixing in the transfer portion of it, because you're seeing so many of these guys that transfer within their first year. A lot of them kind of have some growing pains throughout the course of the year. And then it's those second seasons right now that we're seeing where these guys are making massive leaps, none bigger than a guy like Tristan Newton at UConn. He's a prime example. He had a solid first year at UConn, but then look what he's doing this year. I mean, when he entered the transfer portal, I didn't anticipate that. Another one, Antonio Reeves at Kentucky. Last year, started the year pretty rough. I would say for the first 2-3 months of the season, he was a bit of he struggled out on the court, but he found his groove. And then now year two, he's been one of the best players in all the SEC. So when you're getting these transfers who have multiple years, that brings an inherent value. But at the end of the day, the winning strategy to me is blending these two. You have to get the transfer port, or you have to get the high school recruits that you want, while also adding around some older experienced guys, but they also have to fit your culture. And that's where some of these younger guys come into play, is if you're able to keep some of these young guys around, like RJ Davis has at North Carolina, or like Armando Bacot has in North Carolina, you're able to establish a culture. And now when the transfers come in, they're able to mold to this culture instead of building a new culture year over year. So there's a lot of value to that. So to me, the answer to the equation is trying to blend these two things together and not going full portal like we let's just call it like we see it, like what we saw with the Arkansas this season. They went full-blown portal, got a bunch of pieces that frankly didn't mesh together at all, and the results are what we saw.
Say it, but you did. So, all right, here's what we're going to do. I want to look at some of these names that Bossy mentioned in his article. We already talked about two of them, Hunter Dickinson and RJ Davis. And I want to ask you guys very briefly, if you were their agent, I understand you're not, where do you think they would make more money? Now, for context, There's 30 picks in the first round of the NBA draft. If you get picked in the first round, you get a guaranteed contract. It's that simple. If you get picked in the second round, you are not guaranteed a contract. They can often sign you to the two-way contract that Bossy mentioned. This year, that money was maxed out at a slightly more than $500,000, but it is not guaranteed, meaning they can cut you at any point in time. There's been a number of players who've signed two-year contracts in recent years who've gone on to be cut, and they do not make that money. Now, given some of the earning potential that is now available in college basketball, that's a very real decision if it's just about the money. In years past, we used to say, I hear players say, I have to go to the NBA. I need to provide for my family. There is a very legitimate case to be made that some of these players could make more money in college basketball than they do in the NBA. So my line of thinking is that if you're not a first-round pick, and you can command over $500,000 in NIL in college basketball, you're going to make more money by returning to college basketball. Certainly, there is room for interpretation on that, though. So, guys, just very briefly, let's do this quick hitter style. I'm going to say a player. You tell me where you think he's got the highest earning potential, whether it's college or in the NBA. And just to, I will start just to put myself out there first. Let's start with Hunter Dickinson, the player Bossy mentioned. It's ironic because when he announced he was returning to Michigan for a sophomore year, he said it would be his last year of college basketball, and now we're potentially looking at a fifth year. To me, this is a player who makes more money in college basketball next year than he does in the NBA. I've not seen him mocked in any first rounds. He's not a first-round candidate on the draftables, in my opinion. I do not think a first-round selection is a realistic or certainly likely outcome at this point. I think he should explore coming back to college. What do you guys think about that? Bossy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that he's definitely a great candidate to come back to college, unless he's just, you know what, I've had my fill of college. I'm ready to go do something different now.
Yeah, he could take the Adamo Sanogo route and say, you know what, I've done all there is to do. I'm moving on. Trav, what do you think?
I mean, it seems like the question for Hunter Dickinson is, would he rather be in Kansas at the Boom Boom Room? Is that right, Bossy? Is that the name of the spot?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's part, yeah.
Would he rather be at the Boom Boom Room or kind of flying around on Southwest Airlines, either in the G League or over in Europe? And I will say, if he did go to Europe, he would make, I would assume, a substantial amount of money, of guaranteed money for multiple years.
All right. We are not going to pursue the Boom Boom Room any further because this is a PG show. RJ Davis. It's another one that I would say is a possible NBA player because I think there's more small, skilled guards that are making the NBA, and RJ Davis has a ton of game. But again, I have not seen or heard really any first-round traction, and this is a guy who I think could command significant money by going back to college somewhere, whether it's North Carolina or elsewhere. Trav, we'll start with you on this one. Earning potential higher in college basketball or in the other pro ranks next year?
I would assume college basketball. Now he could be one that could get a two-way contract. And with that, you could get some higher earning potential there. But the safe bet is return to college basketball, continue to tear it up over at North Carolina, going to make a substantial amount of money. And then potentially next year, we'll see how the draft shakes out again. It could be another down year aside. The top of the draft is going to be very, very strong, but how deep it is remains a question. So could elevate his draft status.
Here's another interesting name for you guys. What about Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton? I mean, here's a player who, and again, these are names straight from Bossy's article. If you haven't checked it out, it is every bit as applicable today as it was 10 days ago. This is a player who I think really considered going to the draft last year, ultimately came back this year, and I'm not sure much has changed with his stock. We know he's an elite rim protector, a drop coverage monster, and we've seen the 7-footer gradually start to expand his skill set and shoot some threes at Creighton as well. But where is his earning potential higher? Bossy, I'll start with you.
That's a really great one because we would assume Creighton would want him back. He's now, I think, the 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year. So you want that guy back, and Creighton certainly is believed to have a robust NIL program, so they can certainly take good care of him on that front. But, man, let's say if a guy like that wanted to hit the transfer portal or put out some feelers about the transfer portal, he would command a pretty penny. Now, on the other hand, if he goes out and has a good NCAA tournament, I think he's a guy. I'm actually working on an article about this right now about guys who could increase their stock in the NBA draft. I think he certainly fits right into that that window, I would lean towards NBA on him because I'm not sure there's anything else he's going to show guys on the college level. And you've got to factor in, we're adding another two-way contract for each team next year. We're seeing more and more second-round players get full guarantees on their money for 2 or 3 years because the top-end guys are getting paid so much. There needs to be some value. So I say Ryan Kalkbrenner, I think his value is as a pro right now.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with that. I think that there's, I think it's possible he commands a big payday by going back to college, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possible outcomes that he plays his way into the first round. And so we will look forward to reading that article for you. Trav, I got one for you. Jeremy Roach at Duke. This is the guy, again, when he decided the captain came back, it was a big thing at Duke last year. And you can pass if you would like, or just pretend there's breaking news and you need to grab your phone. But to me, this is a guy who is going to make more money in college basketball, regardless of where it is, than he is in the pro ranks next year. I said it first. Do you agree or disagree?
No, I couldn't agree more. No-brainer. Just he's had a great year, but he is one of those players that just is who he is. And I don't mean that disrespectfully because, again, he's a very good basketball player. Another slight undersized shooting guard. But to me, if he were to return to college basketball, it's going to be similar to Hunter Dickinson. Would you rather come back to Duke or even hit the portal, going to make a lot of money, or would you rather be somewhere in the G League or overseas?
Well, I would phrase it to you this way. What happens if Trevor Keels went back to Duke? I would argue he would have made more money at Duke than he did by going pro recently. And, of course, those two former high school and EYBL teammates as well. All right, fellas, I want to turn the page. Trav, do we have breaking news?
No, I was just saying, no question. Trevor Keels absolutely should have returned for a second year.
Okay. The other source of available talent right now is high school players who are on the board. And no one's talking about high school players right now. It's all about the portal. But there are still some very big name players who are potential immediate impact players who are available. And so I think it's only appropriate that we talk about those guys. And by extension, big name players who were committed to programs that were without a head coach. So I want to start with Liam McNeely. We've had a lot of dialogue about him on this channel over the course of the year. It's well documented. He is one of my favorites. Highly skilled big wing. Has really done as well as he can to maximize the athleticism in his frame, but he is skilled, he is efficient, he is productive. There are going to be questions about the upside because he's not some long and athletic, exceptional athlete. But when it comes to who's the best basketball player right now, I said it before, I'll say it again, I think he is among the top 10 in high school basketball. He was previously committed to Indiana. He recently decommitted. Ironically, it was just a day after Indiana announced that Mike Woodson would return. And so now his recruitment becomes wide open. So I will leave this up to either one of you and allow either of you to jump in. What do we know about where things stand with Liam McNeely's recruitment right now? Either one of you, take it.
I think there's
Go ahead, boss.
Go ahead,
you got it. Nope, you got it.
I think there's a general assumption out there that Kansas is going to be the team to beat, and they're certainly involved, and certainly a team that was right there when Liam picked Indiana. But from what I've also gathered and just asking around is I don't expect him to make a snap decision, and I think he's a kid who may want to see a little bit of which transfers are ending up where before he makes that decision. I'm sure with Kansas he might be keen to find out what Johnny Furphy does in regards to the NBA draft. If it's a one or the other situation, I would imagine Kansas would probably rather have Furphy back for another year. Ideally, they would like to have both. So they certainly want him and are certainly going to be the clubhouse leaders. But, there's just so many moving parts. I think it's hard for us in the spring to call anybody a lock for anything.
Add to that point?
No, Bossy's spot on. Liam is definitely anticipating to take his time with this recruiting process. He has been getting blown up by colleges all over the country, and something that hasn't been reported yet, but we have many of the schools that we're ready to talk about. Many of the schools that have been in contact. Obviously, yes, Kansas has been confirmed in contact with Liam McNeely, but so has UConn, so has Kentucky, Houston, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, Baylor, Texas, Michigan State, Florida. Even some pro options have been inquiring to Liam and his circle. So There's many more others that have been in contact. So again, as Bossy said, Liam is going to continue taking his time with this recruiting process, take some visits, potentially take this all the way up until May, and see really how this thing shakes out and how these rosters fill out throughout the course of the portal cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a good decision by him to let the portal play out a little bit and consequently see where he's got the most immediate opportunity. Trav, you mentioned pro options there, and that leads me to the second best available prospect on the current 247 Sports national rankings in the class of 2024 and a McDonald's All-American. Bossy, this one is going to come to you. Bryson Tucker remains open. He is a prospect that was believed to be heavily considering G League Ignite. Now, of course, this is before Adam Silver's comments on All-Star Weekend when he publicly questioned the long-term viability of Ignite. Now, Ignite still has Dink Pate in their program, which means that presumably they are going to be around for at least one more year because he is not draft eligible this year. But we have yet to see any other notable commitments for the program next year. What does this do to someone like Bryson Tucker? Is he now more of a candidate to play college basketball than we might have thought a month ago?
Possibly so, because also another part of that is whether or not the G League is around next year or the future of it, they have to want you as well. And from what I have gathered, it's still a bit of a mixed opinion of, I think they would, at the end of the day, the G League would take him, but I don't know that he's a guy that they're out there actively recruiting like they have some of the guys in the past. And the two schools most commonly linked with him have been Michigan State and Kansas. He's taken official visits to both, but it appears that the level of contact between Tucker and both of those schools has been a little bit lukewarm. He's one that's tough to get a read on. I think outside of his father and his mother, probably not many people really know what's going on with his recruitment. And so he's one that I think as we start to see new coaches filter into new jobs is a guy that could be one out there for those who want to take a swing on a high school player, can go out there and really make a real run at. Now, I think a caveat with this is going to be he's going to want a lot of available playing time early and in a situation where he can step in and play quite a bit. But I think for a guy who's ranked in the top 30 as a McDonald's All-American, he is about as wide open as you can get right now.
All right, Trav, this one is going to be for you. We talked about the impact of the coaching carousel on the transfer portal. We haven't yet talked about the impact on players who are signed. One such player is Kenai Ruth out of IMG Academy in the New World 3 SSB grassroots program. He committed to Juwan Howard. Juwan Howard is obviously not the head coach at Michigan anymore. What do we know about what Kenai Ruth will do moving forward?
Yeah, it seems as though he's going to continue monitoring the situation at hand. To me personally, this is not necessarily inside information, nothing that I'm sitting here reporting, but just kind of looking at it from even a fan perspective, I would assume he's going to open it up at some point. Just like we were talking about this earlier, if we ever see a coach get fired, to me, it's an assumption that most of those kids are going to go in the portal, and frankly, as they should. There's no downside to entering the portal or pulling your name out of a commitment after the coach you committed to is fired. It only gives you more options. Doesn't mean you're not going to consider that school once a new hire is made. But as of right now, based on what I have been told, is that Kenai is currently talking things over with his family and those people closest to him in a circle, trying to figure out just exactly what they want to do. Do they want to wait until a new coach is hired and then decide if they're going to reopen it or not? So it's kind of in a wait and see type of process.
Important to note that the IMG season is not over yet. They qualified for Chipotle Nationals, which will happen immediately after the McDonald's All-American game. So not necessarily expecting any big news before that happens. Last but not least, Bossy, Mike Hopkins, when he was still the head coach at Washington, scored a major recruiting win when he got a commitment from Zoom Diallo, a local prospect who chose the Huskies over some of the more prominent programs on the West Coast. Of course, now things could be starting from scratch. As Travis just said, that is kind of the assumption when there's a coaching change that the recruitment opens. What do we know about Zoom Diallo and where he is at in his process?
So with Zoom, I actually reached out to Zoom over the weekend and he got back with me. For one, he's still focused. Prolific Prep, like IMG, is still playing. They were in the grind session finals over the weekend. They too are in the Chipotle Nationals, so he's got that to take his mind A little bit. And also with him, you have to factor in that he's a local kid. And, I assume there's some things in play that helped get him to Washington that would still be available to him if he were to choose Washington with whoever gets coached. But he told me for right now, he's trying not to think about it. He's trying to focus on the end of his season and just kind of see what plays out. He's not stressed out. He tells me he's not stressed out, at least, because it could be a very stressful situation for people. But I believe him to be in a wait and see mode. And I do believe, just based on checking with sources in the area and stuff, that as long as Washington makes a good hire here and someone that he develops a good connection with early, I think he would be the kind of guy that the Huskies or a new Huskies coach would have a really good chance at keeping around.
Zoom Diallo. All kidding aside, gentlemen, thank you so much for your analysis here today. We've been live with you for almost 2 hours. We started with breakdown of the NCAA tournament, Cinderellas and favorites, and then we shifted to the transfer portal. This is just the beginning. If you like this type of coverage, you can make sure to follow us here in the 247 Sports channel or go to 247sports.com. Today alone, Travis has coverage of the transfer portal. Isaac Trotter has coverage of team needs. And I have a look at the best mid-major players in the NCAA tournament. And we have 50% off annual VIP memberships that will be going on until tomorrow night at 11:59. We will continue to have coverage of the NCAA tournament, transfer portal, and the NBA draft for the days, weeks, and months ahead. So as always, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you again soon.